Today, let's talk about this little knife here, the Kershaw Culpepper in copper scales. Overall, my thoughts on this knife are immaculate. This represents an excellent piece of value and an excellent knife generally for you and your everyday carry. I think the copper scales add a nice touch, and I think they're the first thing that you notice when you get this knife in hand. While it does make the knife heavier, I think about 1.5 ounces heavier than the versions that have G10 scales with a stainless steel bolster, I think it's much worth the wait because I think you save on width, and you also get this beautiful patina that develops after only a little bit of time. Each of these little scallops are like jigging out of the copper scale itself, which provide interesting little ways in which it can patina over time. So on mine, the outer edges are more smoothed down, where the inner edges are darker, looking almost like a penny. And the flat bolster also provides area, where in my case it's a little scratched up, but you also see differences in patina developing over time. And the copper scales are just a beautiful, beautiful option to see how your knife develops over time. Let's talk about the blade. The blade is a pretty large chunk of D2 steel with a mirror polish finish, as this is the Smoky Mountain Knife Works exclusive provided by Kershaw and Smoky Mountain Knife Works in collaboration. It's a full flat grind with a high grind, which makes it a great slicer, very, very keen edge. And some people sometimes complain about how D2 is not the most stainless of steels. It doesn't really matter in this case because it's such a high polish. You can see my hand waving back at you in just the mirror polish. In terms of markings on the blade, there's just Kershaw at the bottom on the show side. And on the other side, there's just some serial number stock keeping units. Country of origin there, China, and then D2 in the very corner. So a very minimal blade. The nail nick is the method of deployment, but you really don't need it. You could just pinch the blade. It exists on both sides, so it is truly ambidextrous as well. There is slight jimping on the back of the knife, but you probably wouldn't use it because it's a slip joint, so putting pressure on the back of the blade will just cause the knife to, fold. In terms of the strength of the back spring of the slip joint, it's rather strong, and you could just hear that, with the knife being deployed. I have no qualms at all about the strength of the spring, and it also does a great job locking shut too. Just a beautiful, beautiful snap that rings out in the copper handles. There are no liners in it either, so it's just solid slabs of copper on either side to house the back spring and that beautiful, beautiful blade. In terms of functionality, I think that this checkering also provides a lot of grip on an otherwise smooth handle, which is good because, you obviously don't want to be losing a handle on your knife. The neutral design of like a Barlow style knife with a slimmer top at the pivot and a bolster and a wider base is really, really neutral and accommodates a lot of different grips and a lot of different styles, making it very, very comfortable to use this knife for long extended periods of time. There's a generous lanyard hole in the back where you can definitely fit paracord through, even double paracord if you wanted to, but I'm not much for lanyards. I think that overall it's a very aesthetic design and it looks really good. And in my time carrying it, I found it to be nothing but an excellent slicer and a cool little piece to carry around because each and every day it develops a little more character that makes it its own. When I first got it, it was brand new and shiny, and now, even after only a couple months, it's already developed a beautifully brown chocolatey color, looking a lot like one of those older 82 and earlier pennies that are made mostly out of copper. It's aged very, very well over time. At the same time, it doesn't have that strong of like a smell, like some coppers and other metals will start to smell bad and like get on your hands and other things like that. This one doesn't really suffer from that, so I think that that's just another reason to pick it up. I think brand new with the manufacturer's suggested retail price, somewhere around $50. And I think that that's definitely a price worth paying for this knife. On Smoky Mountain Knife Works, there's a very similar style knife that's also copper handles, but it's a double detent locker. So it's a slightly different locking mechanism where there are little arms inside the handles that will click detent balls into the bottom of the blade. So it'll operate like, how a detent functions on like a liner lock knife. The little ball locks into the blade and allows it to like stay closed, but they would just have that for the open and closed positions, and it would be a flow through design because there's no back spring. I haven't purchased that knife, but I think it was less of what I wanted because I was more interested in the strong steel back spring that allows for it to have that beautiful old-timey action, snap closed and snap open with a nice strong retention, as opposed to just like one instance as opposed to a gradient of retention. Let's get some measurements in before we leave. So overall length is just over 4 inches, probably about 4 1/4, just under 4 1/4. The blade is about 3.4 inches long with about just over 3 inches of cutting edge. Though the plunge is kind of like its separate own region, but you can definitely get all the way in there to sharpen if you have to, or when you have to rather. So it's going to be a knife that lasts a long time. In terms of breadth of the blade at its widest point, it's about 0.8 inches. The width of the handle, which is important for carrying, is about 0.8 inches as well, 0.75 inches probably. So it's a very narrow package this way. When the blade is closed, it does stick out further. It's about 1.1 inches. The thickness, really thin knife because of the copper scales, not requiring much extra support. Looking at less than half an inch, probably about 0.35 inches thick, which is nice and thin. Very comparable, thinner than the Benchmade 940, as you can see. And obviously, thinner than something like the Buck 110. And lighter than it too. I believe the weight on this knife is somewhere between 4 and 5 ounces. I don't have a scale to measure it, and it's not posted on the Smoky Mountain Knife Works website. It's very hefty, but it does tend to sit at the bottom of the pocket, so I have no fear of losing it. It has excellent cutting capabilities, and the blade honestly just slices through things like ease. It is long enough to cut through things like apples and other things like that, if that's a concern. Yeah, so I consider it to be a very, very, very value-oriented knife from Kershaw, which is, I guess, what their main focus is. There's this version with copper scales and the D2 blade steel. They also make a 7CR17 blade steel version with G10 scales and steel bolsters. And there's also one with a jigged bone style handle, like old-timey style knives. It's like an amber color. And I believe also stainless steel bolster with also a 7CR blade. All of these versions are available on Smoky Mountain Knife Works and several other retailers as well. But the copper is the only one that's offered by just Smoky Mountain Knife Works. If you only have $50 to spend on a knife, this would be a pretty good $50 well spent. I think it's an excellent knife at the end of the day, and one that would be really, really cool to have in your collection and pass on, because I think it will definitely stand the test of time and develop a little bit of character each and every day that you carry it with those beautiful, beautiful copper handles. Thanks for watching.